Normally, global forecasting is all about, mathematical precision. You look at the global economy, the supply chain diplomacy, and analysts just point to the data on a dashboard and say, well, there's the trend line.
Right. It's all very quantifiable. We like our future to be predictable, to be neatly modeled on a spreadsheet.
Yeah, exactly. But right now, those dashboards are kind of short-circuiting. So today, we are tossing the spreadsheet totally out the window. We're looking at a predictive landscape that is just raw, unfiltered, and honestly, terrifyingly chaotic.
It really is.
We are jumping into a really fascinating, dense, live-streamed forecast from a prominent Polish clairvoyant, Krzysztof Jackowski. And since it's mid-July 2026 right now, he claims to see the trajectory of, well, the next 2 years.
And just to be super clear on our mission for this deep dive, we are treating this live stream strictly as a piece of fascinating source material. Like, we aren't here to validate or debunk these visions.
No, definitely not.
And we absolutely aren't taking any political sides either. We're just going to impartially unpack the specific predictions he lays out, covering geopolitics, economic shifts, and some truly bizarre global anomalies. We want to examine the underlying mechanics and, the collective anxieties they really represent.
Right. And Jackowski's timeline explicitly marks this current moment, so the second half of 2026, as the starting line. He sees this as the beginning of I'm looking at the mechanics of this, and the part that really stands out to me is the shifting dynamic of global influence. Because the forecast claims China will actively step in, like applying heavy diplomatic pressure on Iran to reach an agreement with the U.S. to quell the war.
Yes.
But then Iran says no. They actually resist the pressure, which, if we look at the reality of global economics, China is Iran's primary economic lifeline, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So why would a regional power defy its biggest benefactor in a moment of crisis? That just seems wild.
It does, but it suggests a transition into this chaotic multipolar world, where traditional unipolar or bipolar leverage no longer dictates outcomes. If Iran resists Chinese pressure, it implies they've calculated that China needs the geopolitical disruption, or perhaps the oil, more than they need to enforce discipline on their partner.
That makes sense.
The vision basically portrays a world where superpowers are really struggling to maintain control over regional conflicts.
The leash has completely snapped. And if traditional powers can't enforce a ceasefire, regional actors might feel emboldened to take, extreme unilateral action.
Exactly.
Which aligns perfectly with his next prediction, the emergence of a third active conflict.
Yeah, joining Ukraine and the Middle East, he envisions a third major local war, mentioning whispers of a highly offensive, sudden move, possibly initiated by Israel, though he does note his own uncertainty on the exact initiator.
The compounding effect of 3 overlapping, uncontrolled conflicts creates this profound psychological shift for everyone. The live stream notes that in this current half of 2026, the phrase World War III stops being just like a fringe internet theory.
Right, it goes mainstream.
Yeah, it becomes widespread, everyday conversation. People will just casually refer to the geopolitical situation as the Third World War.
Which is a terrifying normalization of global conflict,
Yeah.
When diplomatic channels fail so publicly, the civilian population just internalizes the idea that the international order has completely collapsed.
Right. And if the international order collapses, local conflicts don't just simmer, they can explode with zero warning. Which brings us to a really specific, catastrophic, localized event in his forecast.
The nightmare scenario.
Yeah, one that demands the entire world's attention.
Jackowski describes this chilling vision of a major city just in ruins. He senses the city is in a warm climate, likely an Arab country. But the most striking element of this segment isn't even just the destruction.
It's his reaction, right?
Exactly. It's his own real-time confusion while experiencing the vision.
He is grappling with whether this total destruction is caused by, a massive earthquake with an epicenter directly beneath this huge city, or if it's the result of a sudden, incredibly brutal civil war or rebellion.
Right.
He explicitly states he doesn't actually understand the cause himself.
But the aftermath is immediate and catastrophic. He sees massive civilian displacement, the local president of this ruined country delivering a desperate national address, and then everyday people across Europe instantly organizing grassroots collections and aid drops for the victims.
I was thinking about this ambiguity, not being able to distinguish between an earthquake and urban warfare. At first glance, you might think, oh, it sounds like a lack of clarity in the vision.
Sure.
But in our modern era, the immediate footprint of a devastating natural disaster and sudden, brutal urban warfare look terrifyingly identical from afar.
That is a really good point.
If you pull up drone footage of a leveled city, the instant infrastructure collapse, the pulverized concrete, the mass displacement, it's the exact same visual signature.
And that ambiguity actually amplifies the dread of the prediction, I think. If a city can just crumble overnight and the global public doesn't even immediately know if it was tectonic plates shifting or human violence, I mean, it shatters the baseline assumption of safety.
Oh, totally. And that detail about the grassroots aid is incredibly telling, too.
Yes, the privatization of disaster relief.
Right. He emphasizes that citizens in European countries will organize to help. If international civilian aid is replacing or completely outpacing the official government response, that implies a total paralysis of state resources.
Exactly. It highlights this recurring theme in modern crises. When institutional systems fail or they're just bogged down in bureaucratic gridlock, everyday people literally have to step in to run logistics.
But if states are so paralyzed that citizens are the ones organizing international aid, that paralysis is going to instantly bleed into the financial sector.
Oh, without a doubt.
The forecast moves from this localized ruin directly into a sweeping economic domino effect that hits you right in your daily life.
Yes. The source is actually highly specific about autumn 2026. He predicts massive food price spikes across Europe. And he is very careful to note this is severe price inflation, not a literal famine.
So the food is there.
Right, the food is on the shelves, but the costs will be just staggering.
And this is tied to a broader currency crisis, right? The forecast points to a significant depreciation of the US dollar on the global stage.
Yep.
And he specifies that this depreciation is triggered by cascading world events like market forces driving the dollar down rather than a deliberate devaluation policy by the US government.
Simultaneously, European countries, and he explicitly includes Poland in this, will start having very serious discussions about raising interest rates to combat this rampant price inflation.
Right.
He also notes the Polish zloty will weaken severely during this period, and for those following cryptocurrency, he drops a brief note that Bitcoin will not return to its peak levels anytime soon, though he actively avoids deep crypto predictions to prevent market panic.
Wait, I have to pause on the macroeconomic mechanics here because this combination of events feels super counterintuitive.
How so?
Well, usually a depreciating global reserve currency, so a weaker US dollar, offers a slight reprieve for Eurozone importers, It makes buying dollar-denominated assets or commodities a bit cheaper for Europe.
Right, in theory.
But Jackowski's predicting simultaneous European rate hikes despite a falling dollar. That implies a severe stagflation scenario where central banks are completely ignoring currency parity just to kill domestic demand. Does the forecast hint at what breaks the supply side so badly that Europe actually has to force a recession?
You're identifying the exact paradox of the current global economic structure.
Yeah.
In a vacuum, sure, a weaker dollar helps European purchasing power. But the vision suggests we are dealing with a total breakdown of global supply chains due to those three active wars and the geopolitical paralysis we just discussed. When the physical supply of raw materials, energy, and especially food is restricted, the price skyrockets globally, regardless of currency fluctuations.
So the central banks are just trapped.
Completely trapped. European central banks, facing skyrocketing grocery bills and a terrified public, might be forced to hike interest rates not to strengthen their currency, but simply to cool down domestic spending.
That is brutal.
They essentially have to intentionally slow down their own economies to prevent hyperinflation, creating this perfect, miserable economic storm of high prices and expensive borrowing.
It's a suffocating picture, honestly. We're looking at a scenario where the geopolitical architecture fails, state disaster response fails, and then the macroeconomic safety nets just fail.
All at once.
Right. But up to this point, we are dealing with human systems. Then the forecast takes a hard turn into entirely unpredictable environmental and health anomalies.
Yeah, this is where the clairvoyant's vision becomes deeply unsettling. He predicts an environmental crisis that defies logical explanation. A massive global river, which he specifically compares to the size of the Amazon, will suddenly lose 40 to 50% of its water.
Which is just, the scale of that is unimaginable.
Yeah.
And he immediately follows that vanishing river with a public health prediction for the autumn. A bizarre new disease or virus mysteriously associated with the color green.
Yes, the symptoms he describes are highly specific. A tiny rash or very small pustules, predominantly affecting young children.
So scary.
And the strangest part is the vector. He links this mysterious new illness to small, white or ivory-colored food flakes.
Like a breakfast cereal or some kind of processed food additive.
Exactly.
I want to unpack the underlying logic of this because combining a massive environmental anomaly with a highly specific foodborne illness feels like a cascading failure in a server farm.
That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, like you spend all your time worrying about a massive geopolitical cyber attack taking down the grid, but then a tiny corrupted line of code, or in this case, a contaminated food additive, just crashes the local network. It demonstrates how incredibly fragile our physical supply chains really are.
That analogy is spot on. These highly specific details, the color green, the ivory flakes, the exact 50% water loss, they are fascinating from an analytical perspective. If we look at what these visions reveal about our collective unspoken anxieties today, they are incredibly telling.
Let's pull on that thread, actually. Why do these specific images resonate so deeply right now?
Well, think about the modern distrust in regulatory bodies and agricultural supply chains. A mysterious virus linked to processed food encapsulates the fear that the systems designed to protect us, like food safety standards, the FDA, global agricultural oversight, are fundamentally compromised.
Right, because we no longer know exactly where our food comes from or what goes into it.
Exactly. The vision taps into this latent anxiety that our complex industrialized food system is just a vulnerability waiting to be exploited.
It takes the grand, abstract concept of supply chain failure and puts it directly on your breakfast table, affecting your children. It's the ultimate violation of safety.
And the vanishing river functions similarly, I'd say. It speaks to a deep-seated ecological dread.
The fear that it's out of our control.
Yes. The anxiety isn't just about climate change as a slow, measurable trend anymore. It's the fear of a sudden, irreversible environmental collapse that completely defies scientific modeling.
Which brings us to the final piece of the forecast and, well, the origin of the source material itself. Poland, the timeline these cascading events are supposedly leading toward.
Right. The clairvoyant foresees impending political upheaval in Poland. He predicts a major explosive scandal involving Ukraine or President Zelensky.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. This scandal is rooted in the recent political past. It's going to bubble up to the surface, and it will cause widespread, very public outrage from the Polish president.
If we look at the historical context there, the friction points between Poland and Ukraine are immense. You have the historical memory of events like the Volhynia massacres, combined with massive modern agricultural disputes over grain imports that directly impact Polish farmers.
It's a very delicate situation.
Yeah, a scandal involving the recent political past could easily ignite those deep-seated tensions, completely fracturing one of the most critical alliances in Eastern Europe right now.
Exactly. The geopolitical implications of Poland and Ukraine falling out publicly are massive. But the forecast doesn't stop there. Later in the year, he sees a figure he refers to as Polish President Nawrocki, taking a highly controversial, rebellious stance on the international stage.
I want to clarify this detail for a second. He specifically names a figure Nawrocki as the Polish president. Currently, Karol Nawrocki is the head of the Institute of National Remembrance in Poland.
Right.
So whether the clairvoyant is envisioning him suddenly rising to power, or if Nawrocki is just a symbolic placeholder for a specific type of nationalist leader, he doesn't really specify.
Regardless of whether it's literal or symbolic, this figure takes a massive anti-establishment stance. He will actively defy Poland's allies, refusing to participate in something on the global stage that he deems shameful.
Interesting.
He will be one of the few leaders to stand up and say no, breaking ranks with the international consensus.
It's fascinating how this forecast weaves a local, specific act of political defiance into the exact same fabric as a massive, world-altering geopolitical catastrophe. Like, a single leader bucking international allies can accelerate the breakdown of the established order just as effectively as a regional war.
This localized political defiance is vital to understanding the entire timeline. Because the clairvoyant makes a definitive assertion, everything we have discussed so far, all of it.
The failing diplomacy in the Middle East, the ruined city, the stagflation.
The drying rivers, the contaminated food, the political scandals in Warsaw, all of this is just the buildup.
It's just the escalation phase.
Exactly. He states that the true absolute climax, what he actually calls the accumulation of all evil, will not hit until the year 2028.
Wow, 2028.
We are currently sitting squarely in the ramp-up. In any predictive framework, whether it's clairvoyance, historical cycle theory, or political science, the period right before a major historical climax is always characterized by this multifaceted, confusing systemic breakdown where everything seems to be failing simultaneously.
We've covered a massive amount of ground today. We mapped out a timeline starting with the diplomatic safety valves blowing off, where traditional powers completely lose their grip on regional conflicts.
Yeah, the unraveling.
We looked at the terrifying ambiguity of sudden urban ruin and the privatization of disaster relief. We explored the complex macroeconomic trap where central banks are forced to hike interest rates despite a falling dollar just to combat supply-side inflation.
A total mess.
And we analyzed the psychological weight of vanishing rivers and contaminated food supplies, all tracking back to political rebellion in Poland, with a ticking clock counting down to 2028.
As we wrap up this deep dive, there's a final concept to really consider regarding the nature of these forecasts.
What's that?
We often judge predictions based on a strict binary like, are they 100% accurate or are they false?
Right, right.
But perhaps the true value of clairvoyance in the 21st century is less about mystical foresight and more about an extreme form of pattern recognition.
Like a societal stress test.
Precisely. If an individual, tapping into the collective consciousness, synthesizes a narrative involving collapsing reserve currencies, paralyzed governments, and tainted food systems, it acts as a stress test for our psychological resilience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It forces us to ask, do our institutions have the capacity to handle simultaneous cascading failures? The value of the forecast isn't just in preparing for a specific event in 2028, it's in identifying the exact vulnerabilities in our systems today.
It challenges you to look at the fragility of the systems we rely on every single day, from the grocery store shelves to international diplomacy. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep your eyes open, observe the shifts in the systems around you as 2026 unfolds, and we'll be right here to unpack the next layer of the map.